Tragically, there is no doubt that climate change exists and continues to progress. To what extent can we approach it with the conventional ideas such as the expansion of renewable energies? Not at all. That's way too late. At least that's what some experts say. Their approaches are crass and curious at the same time because they want to intervene in global climate change. The keyword geoengineering. They want to use high-tech to combat climate change. Let's look at the question, can we still be saved? Now on Click Some Science and Fiction, welcome. Don't forget to subscribe to never miss another video.
1, 2.
Parasols in space or artificial volcanic eruptions. These are just two of the many approaches of the research area called geoengineering. This refers to targeted human intervention in climate change. The goal to influence the radiation balance of the Earth or to lower the atmospheric CO2 concentration in order to compensate or at least mitigate man-made climate change. And although the concrete approaches and projects sound strange and crass at first glance, they really have potential. Discussions about geoengineering are anything but new. Especially in the 60s, many project ideas were brought into play. For example, an idea came up to ignite 10 hydrogen bombs below the Arctic Ocean. The vapor of the explosion cloud would freeze in the upper atmosphere, reducing heat radiation. The hope for effect, a climate improvement on the entire Earth by changing the air circulation. However, such ideas are usually not thought through to the end. They are usually nothing more than very theoretical constructs. And there's a reason for that. There is hardly anything more complex than global climate change. And so the actual effects of the respective projects were and are usually absolutely unpredictable. And this is exactly where the criticisms begins. Are risks being ignored? Do these ideas endanger all life on Earth? And do they undermine conventional approaches to reducing greenhouse gas emissions? 10 years ago, climate scientist Alan Robock produced a list of the dangers of geoengineering, and his environmental and climate risks are still more than current. The consequences that human or technical failure would bring with them are unimaginable. In addition, Robock fears that such projects reduce the willingness to reduce CO2 through other measures. In addition, he raises the question of a supranational control because who could rule out that the ideas would be abused for military purposes? How can such a global control committee be founded if individual states have conflicts of interest that may be incompatible? In plain language, which country may concretely determine how warm it should be, how much it should rain, and how many hours of sunshine it should give? Robock has gone through various scenarios on the computer and calculated that the global average temperature could actually be reduced by geoengineering, but the side effects are fatal. For example, the summer monsoon in India and China, which is vital for the peasants there, would be affected. Less rain would probably fall, and other geoengineering projects would probably also bring disastrous consequences. In addition, a concrete example. A team of astronomers at the University of Arizona is dealing with the topic of geoengineering and wants to combat climate change on Earth, such as placing something like a giant parasol between the Sun and the Earth. Specifically, they propose silicon wafers, which are supposed to reduce the solar radiation by almost 2%. 16 million thin silicon wafers would have to be shot into space with the help of electromagnetic cannons. At the point where they cancel the attraction of Earth and Sun, they would then line up and form a kind of awning. Wow! But this idea is still in its early stages. First, this would of course be associated with gigantic costs. On the other hand, it's hardly possible to assess the risks. Model calculations predict that the tropics could cool off through such a project. However, the Arctic and Antarctic could still be warmer. And what would such a project bring? a lot of risks and no guarantee of success. But if you think that only a small number of slightly crazy scientists are dealing with the topic of geoengineering, you've got a wrong idea. The German Research Foundation, DFG, launched their project in May 2013. But there, too, we must urge restraint. In an official statement, it says that previous research on this topic has focused heavily on the technical possibilities of climate engineering. However, research should provide the scientific basis of evaluating the advantages and disadvantages of different climate engineering measures. The limited knowledge on possible undesirable side effects is an important research gap. In order to close this, research teams from different areas would have to get involved. For example, politics, ethics, economics, law and technology. The position of the German federal government on geoengineering is also clear. It continues to rely on climate protection and the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and the adaptation measures. However, they are not planning concrete geoengineering projects at the moment. Many other governments around the world have not yet made their official position on the subject public. In China, for example, the state supports some scientists that are researching how climate that was changed by geoengineering would have an impact. Yet, so far, no outdoor trials are planned here. As far as geoengineering is concerned, most scientists and heads of government on the planet consider it far too early to actually implement such techniques. There has been too little research on the topic and the effects are too dramatic. It is also clear that such ideas cannot be completely ruled out as a remedy for the worst effects of global warming. For example, David Keith from Harvard University, who has been researching geoengineering for 25 years, says he wants to spray sulfur dioxide on a large scale into the stratosphere, because the particles could reflect the sunlight out into space so that the temperature on Earth would be lowered. This method, the so-called solar radiation management, is thus almost an artificial volcanic eruption. This happened naturally in 1991 when a Philippine volcano threw 70 million tons of sulfur particles into the stratosphere. At that time, the average temperature on Earth sank by almost half a degree. David Keith is convinced. Research so far suggests that a small amount of well-proportioned geoengineering is less risky than if we did not do it, and the majority of people in the world would benefit from it. But of course, greenhouse gas emissions have to be reduced at the same time, whatever happens. His method is cost-effective. Billions of dollars a year are applied, but this does not solve the problem. Greenhouse gases in the atmosphere do not diminish. But Keith cannot be dissuaded. He plans to implement his idea for the first time soon, using a balloon to spray particles such as sulfur dioxide and aluminium at a height of 25 kilometers. And then he wants to investigate to what extent they actually attack the ozone layer, and sensors are to measure how strongly the particles reflect the sun rays. He sees no danger in his project. The effects of the experiment on the stratosphere are comparable to a 1-minute flight of a passenger plane. No matter what we do, science will need to find some answers concerning our environment, geoengineering, high-tech and climate change. If you are interested in this topic, click on this video. Stay tuned and see you soon.